Well, hello, folks. It is Theology Thursday. I'm Adam. Lindsay's joining us momentarily. Presently,
Hi.
There she is. This is what our third
Yes,
week
week 3.
in unpacking God in public, how the Bible speaks truth to power today by Tom Wright. And so we're covering chapters 5 and 6.
Correct.
And you might have seen Lindsay's been really good the last 2 weeks, including this week, 3 weeks, sharing supplemental videos that might help you in a way as you're making your way through the book. And one this week was actually from Mike Winger.
Yes,
there's like something floating around. What in the world? I saw it and I about went cross-eyed trying to look at it.
Yeah, and those are on the church's Facebook page.
Yes.
Not the group.
Not in the group. And so we're not sharing them in the group as well?
Faith Methodist Church. The Facebook page.
Yeah, and that direct link is facebook.com/faithmethodistchurch.org, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, and we're not the Korean one.
No, we're not the Korean one. We're the one with the green and espresso brown charquetra.
All right, so to start this week, one of the things that, I felt like he kind of kept alluding to, bringing up like the passage from Micah 6:6-8.
Which is interesting because if I'm not mistaken, you might have read that today. I know you started reading Micah today.
Yes, and I had the kids, that was their memory verse for last school year.
Oh, yeah.
Was Micah 6:6-8.
And we've got it hanging in our kitchen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, with the little bird.
So I made them memorize it.
All right, what is that passage again?
Micah 6:6-8. It says, "With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." So
very summative passage in the Old Testament and really in all of Scripture.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I did have our kids memorize that one.
Yeah.
That was their memory verse last year. But I kind of feel like chapter 5 and 6 kind of kept hinting back to that. Like, what does God require of you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
All right. So chapter 5, power, faith, and the law.
Okay.
And he of course doesn't use Oxford commas.
Yeah.
Which is annoying. So
you used it in your notes.
I do. I add them in. So it's like roundabout page like 76. Okay.
76 where he starts. Yeah.
Okay, so he starts talking about how the media often makes it impossible to hear what your leaders are saying.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's true, especially lately. Even more true, because we found out how much like control there is of like our social media or internet searching and that sort of stuff too. But I find that it's true on both sides.
Yes, and it's not just true.
It's not just a left versus right thing. It's the right has the media that they want you to hear, and the left has the media that they want you to hear, and the truth is somewhere in between the two.
And it's not just media and the gen pop as I refer to it. It's also like people. People are very polarized, so much so that.
Well, I also feel like people tend to mimic the media that they listen to the most.
Yeah.
So, like, you can tell when someone's talking what media they listen to because they say the same little phrases and catchphrases and slogans that the media of choice uses on both sides. Found that to be true.
Yeah, you can tell when somebody listens primarily to podcasters and when someone listens primarily to, like, network news or cable news.
And you can definitely tell the difference between like someone who listens to CNN and someone who listens to Fox. Like and both of those are like extremely polarized.
But also like
even happening.
So you didn't know I was going to bring this up. I didn't think of it until just now. But in his book Disruptive Witness, Alan Noble, who wrote our last book that we covered, he talks a bit about that, like just in a conversational way. He talks about how it's actually common for us to enter into a conversation with someone in which we disagree, and and we're each speaking and we're each taking turns speaking, but we're just talking past each other. Like we're not connecting in a way, like we're not connecting in any way on neutral ground instead. And so you can share the gospel with someone and then walk away and think, that was strange, and like it has no effect on them. Or you can disagree with someone's politics and have a long conversation where it has no effect on either of you.
One thing I noticed that drives me real crazy is when you're in so I feel like it's more prevalent on Facebook than like Twitter, but you even see it some on Twitter where like someone disagrees with somebody, but they don't have the basis of knowledge with which to like express their disagreement. And so like they'll send us emails asking us to defend their point of view so that they can then post on social media, well, here's what, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not even their point of view. It's my point of view that they're drawing out of me for them to post on some Facebook group.
You gotta go to the ammo store.
Or it's like and they're like, I know what they're saying is wrong,
but I don't know how
to articulate it. And I feel like I need to say something about it. It's like, well, maybe you need to learn about it before you need to articulate about it, because it sounds like you don't understand it any more than they do.
You know that like intuitively you disagree or instinctively, and that could be because of your enculturation, or it could be any number of things, but you don't own it.
No.
You don't own it enough to like.
And I'm that way on some things. Like somebody will say something, I'll be like, that just screams wrong to me, but I don't know why. And so normally I write it down until I can figure out why.
Yeah.
Like I have a long process. Sometimes it's years before I come back to like, why did that bother me?
Yeah.
Like, why did the way they say that bothered me? I still don't know why in their behalf bothers me so much.
It shouldn't.
It does.
It shouldn't.
So on page 77, he says, we're living in a clash of ideologies. And I feel like that's even more prevalent these days. Like, it's funny because in campaigning and like the presidential election coming up, you'll have somebody make a video trying to smear one side, and they end up promoting that side to their followers, you know, like someone will make an ad that's like trying to smear Trump, right?
Yeah.
And the video will actually people who like Trump will be like, that's all the reasons I'm voting
for him. That's why he's my guy.
You know? And then it's the same vice versa. Like someone will make a video about, you know, Harris and be like, this, you know,
can you believe what she did?
Here's all the reasons why you shouldn't vote for her. And someone who supports her will be like, it's exactly why I'm supporting her.
Which does make me
funny that like
it makes me wonder, are they trying to convince like undecided people, or are they just trying to turn out the vote from their base or those who are their base adjacent or something? That's interesting.
It is interesting because like what one side says is like a bad thing, the other side's like, no, that's a good thing.
That's precisely.
And so it's such a clash that like you can't even. Like, it's like, no, we know all those things. That's why we're voting for them. No, we know all those things. That's why we're voting for them.
Yeah.
Like, and so in our society, it's okay to find your identity in anything except for Jesus.
Ooh.
That was kind of like along those same lines.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that I had, and it's kind of like page 78 adjacent.
Okay.
Was, and I'll read the quote after I ask the question.
Okay.
The question is, do we seek to spread democracy or do we seek to spread Jesus? And I feel like that's been a long time question of the church.
Yeah.
Because for, a long time, missions has been spreading a certain way of living.
Yeah.
And not about Jesus.
Which is that's not even a new thing though.
No. That's what I'm saying. It's been like that for a long time, like centuries.
Yeah.
But sometimes spreading Jesus does mean spreading some of those things.
Sure.
So anyway, page 78, he says, this is the quote that the question is asked on. So, all of this calls into question the normal Western assumption that if only we could spread our style of democracy to the rest of the world, it would solve the problems in all directions. And so that's
kind of triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind.
Right. Are we spreading democracy, or are we spreading Jesus? And are we spreading like a certain Western way of doing things, or are we spreading Jesus?
Well, you remember even all the way back in the early 5th century with Patrick, you remember his way of doing evangelism
Mm-hmm.
and cultural evangelism was radically different than Rome's, because you remember the distinction. Well, you probably remember the Celtic way of evagelism.
Right.
That's where we've read about it. Rome would go and civilize a nation, and then evangelize them.
By civilize, they mean turn it Roman.
Turn it Roman. Like you can't
life,
evangelize barbarians was the assumption.
Right.
And so Patrick instead went and lived, quote, among the barbarians, and shared the gospel from the inside, rather than coming in first trying to civilize them and then evangelize them. He came in and evangelized them and figured the gospel will work its way outward.
Yeah.
And the culture, if it's barbarian, will become more civilized and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does. But it didn't. The culture did not necessarily become Roman.
No. It became a civilized Celtic culture.
Some of it worked its way out.
Yeah.
But some of it didn't.
Sure.
Just, you know.
Well, so that passage always calls into question the normal Western assumption that if we could only spread our style of democracy around the rest of the world, it would solve problems in all directions. Obviously, the government isn't the church, at least in our American context, and vice versa. But that did remind me of, and he mentions it later on.
Oh, there's that meme. Have you seen the meme floating around?
What meme?
There's like a meme, and it's like Jesus teaching people, and it says like, you know, you should care for the poor and the widows and orphans. And they're like, you mean give money to the government for them to do it? And he's like, no, I don't think you're hearing me. You. Yes. So that triggered a lot of thoughts in my mind. One of which he does bring up in the next page or two. One is the Arab Spring. Remember, it took place during Obama's presidency, and it was like, oh, democracy is going to spring up in Lebanon, Libya, and then in all these other places throughout the Arabic world, and that's going to bring peace to the Middle East and rain in Spain and all that sort of stuff. And I remember peace in the Middle East being a big catchprise when we were kids.
Yeah, that was
like what you said before you like left the party though.
Yeah.
You'd be like, peace in the Middle East, and then you'd leave.
Did you ever respond rain in Spain?
No.
Okay, well, so it reminded me of the Arab Spring. It reminded me, of course, of the War on Terror. If we can just like spread democracy, if we can go democratize, you know, these Muslim nations and give them the right to vote and give their women the right to go to be educated and all that, man, everything's going to be wonderful. But then that even took my mind back to World War I. Wasn't it the one that was to make the world safe for democracy? The war to end all wars? It was at least the war to end all wars. War II, I think, was.
But I think World War II
was to make the world safe for democracy. And so that brings up like the whole myth of progress, because progressivism politically, academically, it's way before that, but politically, it's been since the late 1800s. In fact, the 20th century was dubbed at its beginning the Christian century, because it was going to be the century where the gospel, like, not just spread throughout the globe, but it transformed the globe, and everything's gonna like it's gonna inaugurate the millennium essentially, and it was bloodier than any century prior. All that just brings to my mind what we think is the technique, so to speak, that's gonna bring world peace is democracy. If we can just spread Western style democracy, there will be no more wars. Everything will be at peace, and there'll be no more poverty.
Yeah, we always think that's like that we have like just the one quick fix, and like, you know, the world and people are just more complicated than that.
Give everybody the right to vote, and that's gonna do it. It's gonna bring back Eden.
Yeah. And that's not. You know, I don't think they voted in Eden.
I don't think. Well, I don't know. It was unanimous if they did.
So it kind of gave me the feel of like, where are we placing our hope? Are we placing our hope in politics and democracy? Or are we placing our hope in the gospel that's going to transform individual lives, which then transforms the world around those individual lives?
Yeah.
And then the question is, are methods of government really what's wrong with the world? Because when you say, if we can only bring democracy, what you're saying is what's wrong in the world is the methods of government. What's wrong in the Middle East is just the way they do government.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not what's wrong. Like, and so why would fixing what's not wrong be the solution?
I love democracy. Well, I mean, you know, to the extent that we have a democracy, I love democracy. I love like the dignity, so on and so forth that comes with like having the ability to vote and feeling like you've got a voice, whatever. Although, in 350 million people, really. But I do like the it's been kind of a recurring theme of his that the Old Testament and the New Testament, especially the New Testament church, they were not so much concerned with how a person in power came into power. They were most primarily concerned with how they wield that power. Yeah, what are you doing with the power?
Yeah.
Which is interesting because,
Well, but in their world, you didn't choose who was in power. In our world, you choose who's in power, so then what they do is slightly your fault.
Yes.
If you chose them to be in power, and then things go sideways, you're kind of to blame. Democracy gives responsibility for what happens to the people.
Yeah. But
not just to hold accountable, but also in the choosing.
But that does also mean it's just obvious that what we often think is wrong with the world is the various nations' forms of government.
Yeah.
That is the problem. That's the problem globally. That's the problem locally.
What is wrong with the world is evil in the heart of man.
Yes.
Each and every man.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with the world.
Whether the nation is democratically elected, or the government of a nation is democratically elected, or the divine right of kings, or whatever it is, the problem is the heart of man, not whether or not there's an equitable system of voting and counting and tallying votes.
So then he points out that one only need to look at the enormous time, attention, and money devoted to a year's worth of electioneering in the USA. I think it's funny that he's very irritated that he doesn't get to vote for the president. And it's
he does mention that like the president is the single most powerful leader in the world, and nobody else gets to vote other than American citizens.
Y'all over there stop listening to him.
Yeah. How about
whoever it's gonna be?
Yeah.
I decided to look it up just to see how much money, because I think it's Friedman talks about like how there's more money spent on dog costumes
for Halloween dog costumes. No, I think it's explicitly Christians spend. I think that's part of it. Christians spend more money, and we could be a little off.
We'll be talking later about
more money on dog costumes for Halloween than they do in giving money to missionaries internationally,
which is crazy.
That is.
So this is. I decided to look it up and see how much was spent. Okay. $4.9 billion was spent in the 2020 elections.
Now, was that in a single year, or is that like the 2-3 year build up?
That is for the 2020 presidential election by both sides and by anyone.
Both major parties.
Parties, anybody else involved. Basically, the total spending was $4.9 billion.
Wow. That's 2020.
That's 2020. 61% was spent by Biden and people that supported him, and then 39% was spent by Trump and people that supported him.
And a blip spent by third parties.
But I just did look it up. It was like $4.9 billion. It equated to about $22 per vote.
Really?
Not Biden's votes for I didn't look up how much Biden paid per vote and how much Trump paid per vote, because I think that would mean that Trump paid less per vote than Biden paid per vote, because he paid more. Yeah. But in general, per vote, it was like $22 per vote.
$22?
Yeah, per vote. Dead and alive.
Well.
All of votes.
Even all
the dead people in Atlanta that voted.
22?
20. That's what it equated to.
Okay.
Which doesn't seem like that much per vote, but it's still a lot of money.
It's a lot of cash.
Especially when there are so many avenues for like free advertisement these days, this day and age. Like, it seems like a whole lot to be spending on ads and stuff. Yeah. Anyway, so moving on to history and postmodernism, just like a header.
Okay.
So our society is not completely postmodern.
No.
That would be complete chaos.
Yeah.
Like, so even though we're kind of a postmodern, but even at the height of postmodernism, everything is not postmodern, because there's got to still be some kind of like backbone structure.
Yeah.
Or things go kind of crazy. Yeah. The attack on religions, he talks about it. I mean, it's basically simply categorical. Like, it just got thrown out as a category. He also talks about how angry atheist. I'm going to name all the people that he named. I just always refer to them as the angry atheists.
Yeah. The new atheism is what they are. He mentioned 3 of the 4 horsemen. I know the 4th horseman.
But they don't engage with real theologians over real ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that that's the same when you're talking about people within different Christian traditions engaging with each other honestly.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't ever happen. Like, you never have, like, an honest debate over credo baptism or pedo baptism.
I mean, you do. One popped up in my YouTube.
A real one?
Oh, yeah.
And most of the time, it's the same. It's the fallacies. It's the straw man. It's the ad hominem.
Well, this was a formal, organized debate. There probably was some ad hominem and red herrings and whatnot, but
normally, like, you see a debate going on social media, it's going to be the exact same.
Yeah.
Like, even within
everyone's going to get hot under the collar.
So I don't think it's an atheist versus Christians thing either.
No.
I think just
it's a how we disagree.
This is just how we disagree these days.
We're very disagreeable in our disagreements.
And we don't ever have that humility to say, hey, I might be wrong.
Yeah. So he invoked Dawkins, and he mentions others, Hitchens and Harris, but his specific mention of Dawkins reminded me of Richard Dawkins has refused and has been asked even by people who agree with him, fans of his, like, why won't you debate William Lane Craig? He's like the top. The top Christian.
There was a debate with Deepak Chopra and Gregory Kokel.
Yeah.
But I felt like that was totally unfair because Deepak Chopra just could not hold his own. That was like a very that was weighted very unfairly.
He seemed like
Dawkins
he was like
and
high
William Lane Craig might be.
So I don't think it'd be fair at all, which is probably why Dawkins won't. But Dawkins says, I've got no interest in talking to him, debating him at all, because I think he's just so repulsive. So he just refuses to debate him, and it's fascinating.
All right, so talking about the history, deism was an easy way to just mentally deal with a sovereign God and the problem of sin.
Yeah.
It made that an easy bridge, and that's a lot of people have that issue. Like, a lot of people, modern people still have that issue. Like, hey, why is there evil in the world if there's this good God?
Yeah.
And so deism was an easy out.
Yeah.
I don't even have to address that. We don't have to talk about this. We can just say, God set things in motion and walked away. He's not responsible.
And we've messed him up, and that's 100% on us. And
But that gave an easier rise to modernism.
Yep.
Because then religion is limited to the private sphere. So you have this world that's the public.
Mm-hmm.
That's science and reason, and then you have the private that's like religion, beliefs, opinions, superstition,
values, and faith.
Yeah, all that just kind of gets. So then categorically, you have the real world, which is science and reason, and then you have this not real world, and so you don't even have to talk about these things over here because they're just not real anymore.
They don't touch the day to day,
right?
And
even though by reason, most of these things are verifiable and
not just verifiable, but they're where we live the majority of our lives. We live our lives.
Logical, verifiable, provable. If you're interested, I can send whoever a list of my kids. My high schoolers had an apologetics course that I made for them, and it dealt a lot with that. Like, is Christianity provable? Is it verifiable? Is it is there a reason? Which, and so I could send that to whoever. Yeah. If anybody would be interested in that thing. So I did post a longer video on the church's Facebook page, not the group, the page, by Mike Winger about some of these apocalyptic concerns. And Adam was a little bit mad at me because, I told you, he mentions in passing
page 81 at the bottom.
Postmillennialism, premillennialism, and the rapture. And so I was like, if that caught anybody wait, what?
There's 3 lines from one paragraph.
Listen, I told you it was a slight thing. So I put that on the church's Facebook page. Yeah. That kind of sums up all of the different ways that people think about, what is that called? Eschatology?
Eschatology. In specific, it is eschatology, but he was also conflating eschatology with interpretive methodology for the book of Revelation in particular.
Yeah. But if you're curious and have no idea what premillennial, postmillennial rapture, you're thinking, I have no idea what that is. That's a good video because it seemed like it was. I mean, it's long.
Yeah, it's an hour and 40 minutes or something.
But it's kind of got the basics. So I wasn't going to discuss that here. Removing God from the world of reason, let us do things in the real world without concern to God or religion.
Yeah, keep him upstairs in the attic.
Yeah. And so I thought of the quote from Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop thinking they should.
That's good.
So if we put God over here in this other category, then we can treat people and treat the world just kind of any way we want to.
Yeah.
We don't have to think things through at all.
Well, it's
you can do the easiest thing. You can do the most efficient thing.
If it's a line from, I think it's Ivan Karamazov, in the Brothers Karamazov, he says, Fyodor Dostoevsky. If I'm not mistaken, the line is, if there is no God, then all things are permissible. Yeah. And in a godless world, it's might makes right, and it's survival of the fittest.
And if we can compartmentalize, we don't have to think about what does it mean to love my neighbor in this situation. We can do just what's easiest and best for me. Yeah. Like, I don't have to give any concern to if it hurts somebody else, if it inconveniences somebody else. Like, I don't have to give any concern to, like, the ethics of the situation.
No, like, consequences beyond me.
And we see that in birth control.
Yeah.
Which people don't even take into consideration the risk to themselves. I won't go into that, but we see that in birth control. We see that in most reproductive technologies. We see that in, he mentions eugenics, and assisted suicide. Like, you start seeing like these things that, well, I could. Yeah. And if, you take God out of the equation, why shouldn't I? Yeah. Yeah. So. And even within the church. So. Anyway, so I did want to mention Wesley and the role of Methodism in the American Revolution, because he's talking about the American Revolution.
Page 82, yeah.
So in America, he's writing from the other shore, from Britain. So the Great Awakening occurred shortly before the American Revolution, and that you had. So John Wesley came over pretty much first.
That is the first Great Awakening, right?
Yes. Yeah. And then you had George Whitefield. And Jonathan Edwards were like some of the other big names in the Great Awakening. You have this rapid spread and renewal and revival of the gospel, and Protestantism particularly. So then you have pretty much immediately after that the American Revolution, which doesn't turn into the French Revolution because you're talking about people who were Christianized and not people who are atheist.
Yeah, and who are taking
and they don't equate, these Americans do not equate the church and the state together. Yeah. Them rebelling against King George is not them rebelling against the church. France, it was different. They were rebelling against the king and his church. So the Methodist movement, which John Wesley did not initially support the American Revolution because of the loss of life, because he felt like it was non-humble of Americans to basically question their place. So he didn't support it. But after the American Revolution ends and America wins their freedom from England, he basically says, well, I'm not going to make them submit, because the Methodist movement at that point was still a reformation within the Church of England, or the Anglican Church, where Tom Wright is in. So it was an Anglican Reformation movement, but because the Americans had thrown off the kingship of Britain, Wesley did not want them to have to resubmit then to the church. Yeah, that was associated also with the state of Britain. Yeah,
that king is over.
Yeah, you have won your God-given freedom, and therefore I'm not going to make you resubmit on grounds of the church. Yeah, and so the Wesleyan movement, or the Methodist movement, became a denomination in the States, and then only after it became a denomination in the States did it become a denomination elsewhere. So he did not think that they should be resubjected to the Church of England once they had been separated from the country of England. But that's just a little history.
Yeah.
For anybody who's curious about Wesley and the Methodist movement and the American Revolution. So, talking about secularism and fundamentalism. I felt like we talked a lot about that last week.
Yeah.
About secularism. The keeping faith in public life. It was impossible and artificial, he talks about on page 85.
Yeah.
And so this kind of like compartmentalization that happened, like people today, individuals today, that create so much cognitive dissonance, anxiety, and like just disharmony in their living. Even if you don't like stop and think about it, because your life is so separate, you feel, and authenticity is a big keyword. Yeah. But this compartmentalization and this like artificial separation of yourselves, like that creates a lot of like internal struggle and inauthenticity in your living. Yeah. Because you're not just whole. And you have a sense that you should be whole, but you're just not. And so that is a result of this secularism and this rise of modernism. Yeah. And then it's something that postmodernism just kind of decided to keep. When they kind of rebelled against modernism, for some reason the compartmentalization and the all different lives kind of stayed. Adam is apparently tired and we're boring him. No. So we'll talk about deconstructing modernity. Page 86. Yep. He says we all want spirituality, but we aren't sure of where to find it. And that reminded me of the rise of the spiritual but not religious. Yeah, totally. In America. Yep. Which, it's more than just America. But I feel like America is like unchristianizing quickly before our eyes, and kind of Europe's already been there, done that. Yeah. But even though like in particular, the United Kingdom, religion is like by law tied into their like their public civic life and whatnot, and so there's no way to formally divide it short of radical change. But we're even seeing that infiltrating the spiritual, not religious. We're seeing it infiltrating the church. Oh yeah, like a lot. Where people are churched people are kind of embracing that too. Yeah, no doubt. And it's funny. There's almost like an apology, like religion is a bad word now. Yeah. Because one of the hallmarks of postmodernism is linguistic theft. Yep. And so they have made religion mean something that it does not mean. Yep. So, do you want to give a definition of religion? Oh gosh. I mean, I can give one and be like yours. Loose and not technical and not worry about it. How would you I don't worry about it. Define it? Religion is how you practice your spirituality, your faith. It is faith in practice. So everybody that has a faith has a religion. Yeah. Even atheists, if they're practicing that belief, that faith, they're putting it into some kind of religion for themselves. Yeah. It's working, it's out in some kind of liturgy, some kind of way. It may be technically more systematized than that. It may be like the way a group does, but I feel like it's basically faith in how you live out the things you believe. Yeah, I would say religion is, it's almost the same thing as worldview. But I also said liturgy, which is another bad word. Yes, you did, and that's also gotten hijacked. Yeah, so I would say religion it's like a totalizing way that we view life, that a person views life, and therefore how they live it out. And so it's not something that's privatized. It's something that is necessarily personal but public. It's there is no divorcing one's religion from one's politics or from one's way of doing work or from one's ethics or anything. Religion really is like it has a totalizing effect on all of life, and it's how you see and understand life. It's how you make your way through life. It's like the values you have, how you live out those values, and whatnot. Yes, and whatnot. Yes. Yeah, so he talks about God, kingdom, and hope, and I love on page 86 how he puts out, listen again to the rumor of other possibilities.
Yeah. That understatement.
Yeah. So he starts talking about Gnosticism, that it's the separation between the physical world and the spiritual world.
Yeah.
And the separation of this physical self and spiritual self.
Mm-hmm.
That permeates the church so much, because it's that idea that when I die, my old sinful body is going to rot in the ground, while my spiritual self is just going to be in heaven with God forever. And I might even get wings and become an angel.
I did not know.
That is not true.
It's not.
Humans don't become angels.
And I didn't hear the angelic part yesterday, but I did hear once this old body's gotten away with, then I'll have no more problem with sin because I'll get rid of this flesh. And I'm like, oh, wait, what?
And that's not.
Yeah.
That's not. To the early Christians, the view was that creation was going to be renewed and reordered, and humans are going to live in renewed bodies. So, resurrected, renewed, restored, made right, made whole, but not different. Yeah,
the same but different.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I phrase it. The same but different. But it's still essentially you, only better, only renewed, only different. Whole.
It'll be interesting to see what things are like inherent to you, and what things were like just part of like living in a broken, sinful thorns and thistles kind of world. Like our freckles. Our freckles, like, is that like an inherent to a person thing, or is that like a oops, the system got broken thing?
And even if,
and like, how tall will you be? Like, because people today are so much taller than they used to be because of nutrition content. And some people, like, you see the Vikings, like, move like their transition from to Greenland or to Iceland and then Greenland. And they got like so much shorter over a few generations. Like, if they knew Jesus, like, and they get the renewed bodies, they get to be taller.
Yeah, I don't know, but I mean, even if like freckles is part of the fall, does that necessarily mean that they would be removed? Because Jesus in his resurrected body still bore the wounds. He had the scars. Yeah. And
so we still have scars, and
there's
still that scar on my leg from when I fell on a fence.
Yeah.
And cut my leg open on 4th of July.
It'll make for an interesting story.
Yeah. All right, so on page 88, he says, Jesus is Lord, therefore Caesar isn't. And I feel like that's a different take than a lot of Christians who are like, well, this is Caesar's world and heaven is Jesus' world. Like,
no, if Jesus is Lord of heaven and earth,
then this is Jesus'.
All authority has been given to him in heaven and on earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then all of this is Jesus'.
Yeah.
It's not like...
It's not just, one day...
Oh, this got messed up,
one day
so we're going to throw all
bow.
this away.
Yeah.
I mean, this will all be renewed and restored, but, And so I also feel like it gives, it's one of my pet peeves, is Christian first and not as an adjective. Like, I feel like most people see their identity as a Christian as just an adjective onto whatever else they happen to be.
Yeah.
Like, they're a Christian baker, not a Christian who is a baker. Yeah. You're a Christian politician, not a Christian who happens to be in politics right now.
Yeah.
You're a Christian American, not a Christian who happens to also be an American. Like, you see the Christian part as like an adjectival part of your personhood, and not the central characteristic of this is who I am.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's just a side annoyance that drives me crazy. So page 89, he says, this explains why standard Enlightenment discourse includes a list of the church's obvious failings. Because, of course, everyone talks about, like, oh, the church's so great. Explain the Crusades.
Yeah.
The Crusades, Inquisitions, and the like, and a strange silence about the massive achievements in health, education, the arts, and many other spheres.
Yeah.
So I looked it up, looked up some stuff. 58% of beds for the homeless are provided by religious organizations.
Oh, wow.
In America.
All this is in America?
Yeah.
Okay.
63% of food pantries are run by religious organizations. 18.5% of hospitals are run by religious organizations.
And the idea of a hospital is inherently religious.
Yeah, and
hospitality.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people think like mental health and Christianity don't go hand in hand, but like number one, our current version of like mental health is probably mostly thanks to the Quakers. But those are things that the church has been doing since the beginning.
Yeah.
But anyway, and 22% of colleges are religiously affiliated.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
Well, I knew a lot that you wouldn't think of, like Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
It's.
I did not expect 22% of American colleges are religious.
Yeah. Princeton.
In addition, religious people are twice as likely to volunteer in their community. Not for their church, not volunteer for their church, but like volunteer for just other random stuff in the community. Even among secular causes, like, so not like passing an offering plate in the church, but like secular causes within the community, the religious people are more likely to give than non-religious people.
Wow.
Americans are the most generous in the whole world. They just give a higher percentage of their income than the rest of the world does.
Yeah.
And specifically Christian Americans are the highest giving people in the world. 59% of money taken in by a church goes to to things outside of the congregation.
Wow.
And so
that's huge.
And even even the 41% that they keep within the congregation, that still funds like their programming, so like their alcohol grief programs, which I think I read that like something like 73% of substance abuse programs contain like Christian content.
Okay.
Not that they're funded by Christians, but they have some sort of faith-based content. But the 41% that they keep funds those type of programs, the food banks, the helping families within their church, like that kind of program. But 59% of the money given does go out of the church.
That's impressive.
Yeah. And so I felt like that was.
Yeah.
I feel like those were interesting statistics, like that American Christians are much more giving. And so people act like the church is the worst, but
yeah,
they're the ones doing the work and paying for the work.
No, imagine in any community. Scroll back to where that was.
It's right there.
No. Imagine in any community, just boom. 58% of emergency beds for the homeless.
Yeah.
Like 58% of all
homeless
shelter
just shut down.
to ministry shut down overnight. 63% of food pantries, boom, immediately gone.
Yeah.
Even 18.5% of hospitals, just get rid of them.
Yeah. I mean, and that would be.
Yeah.
In a lot of communities, there's not multiple hospitals.
No,
like most communities are not like the Metro Atlanta where you can go to one of like 10 hospitals.
Yeah.
At any given time, like most places have like one hospital.
Yeah,
and you'd lose 22% of colleges.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then you start talking about servant leadership, which I feel like it does not make sense to the world. It's become an underlying implication because you talk about public servants. You talk the police sort of serve and protect, and so service is a big part of how we view leadership, but I don't think that's necessarily inherent to the world. I think that they're still holding on to these ideas from the past, which I think Wright was getting.
What do you mean ideas from the past?
Like Christian ideas from the past.
Oh,
like they're still trying to hold on to these Christian ideals that have built had built civilization until Christianity kind of got kicked out.
No, yeah, that is the Tom Holland thesis.
Because it does not make any sense to the world. Like, from a world standpoint, might makes right. Yeah. From a survival of the fittest standpoint, might makes right. So there's no reason to think that our leaders are servants and are serving us in any capacity except for the capacity that Jesus came and served.
Yeah.
So.
Servant leadership is 100% a theological. It's theologically derived.
Yeah. And so I
100%.
And like people are out there and they act like pastors are just like out there like not working, getting rich.
They're just the mooches.
Yeah, like that's the joke we hear all the time. Like, oh, it must be nice to not do anything. And it's like, ha 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 ha. Yeah, that must be nice. I wonder who's doing that. But most pastors, the majority of pastors in America are working multiple jobs.
Yeah.
Bivocational is the most common. It doesn't matter how much you've been educated.
No.
You're out there. Most of them are probably cleaning the toilets on Sunday morning at church.
Or whatever the equivalent.
Yeah, mowing the grass, setting up for Sunday service. Like they're serving in all the ways, especially the ways that nobody else is going to volunteer to serve.
And not just because, like, not just because, let's be honest, not just because folks don't want to clean the toilet or don't want to mow the grass.
People just don't think about it.
Well, and, you know, if service is at 11 and you're there at 10:30, you're there early. Well, most of the prep stuff has been done way before that.
Yeah.
And so it is a matter of, like, it's a matter of, like, time that's available and all that sort of stuff.
And it's a matter of, like,
yeah.
Most people don't think about toilets being cleaned unless the toilets are not cleaned.
Yeah.
Most people don't think about, you know, who got here and made coffee that takes 40 minutes to make in this giant percolator because they're not there without coffee.
Yeah.
You know, they only think about it if the coffee's not ready when they get there.
Yeah.
And so most of it's just stuff that, not just that people don't want to do. Cause
it's not like, toilets are beneath me. It's not that.
Fair. Yeah. It's just things that you don't think to do or things that, like, it didn't occur to you to do.
Or you've just not carved out the time to be able to do it. And so you miss the opportunity.
Yeah, because
when you get there when the prep is
I remember being
done.
A teenager and I used to clean the church
when
I was a teen. I would volunteer for church cleaning because I had the time available and it was, you know.
I remember you used to clean y'all's church when we were dating.
Yeah,
I remember that.
I used to volunteer to clean the church because, like, number one, it was quiet, you know, just vacuuming the halls and cleaning windows.
During college, Chris Willie and I, he was hired to do it, and I would go help him out every once in a while. And it was dark. He got paid, and it was dark, and it was at night and whatnot.
I don't know who mowed the grass.
It is peaceful.
But I did clean the church as a teenager because, it was something that I could do.
It was a way to serve the church.
And it was something that was, like, an efficient, like, easy thing for me to do.
Yeah.
I didn't have to have special skills. So, he essentially points out that in the Enlightenment, we're trying to have a Christian worldview a Christian vision without Christ. But without Christ, there's no reason for people to act like that.
No.
There's no reason for people to have any type of virtue.
Yeah.
And
which, I mean, in France, they didn't. He talks about the guillotine.
Yeah, they didn't. And that's what happened. They didn't value life. They didn't value anything. They tried to keep the idea of certain ideas of civilization, but I mean, you could say the Romans had certain ideas of civilization that did not make them virtuous.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
the Romans, the Greeks, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they all had very efficient ways of being civilized.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were all civilized.
Yeah.
And I think we forget that, like, back then, when you're talking about Assyrians, Babylonians, like, those of us who are European by blood, we were the barbarians.
Yeah.
We were the invading barbarians.
Yeah.
So whenever you're reading those stories, you're like, oh, these barbarians coming in, that's probably you.
Mm-hmm.
As your people. So the church has opted out of this world to just sit back and kind of hope for the next one. They're like, oh, it's too broken.
Yeah.
So in Wright's appeal to use reason, though, one of the things I did notice is he kind of overlooks the noetic effects of sin.
Okay.
And that would be that a mind captive of sin is not fully free to reason and truth. Like, okay, so Dawkins and William Lane Craig, let's say they do have a debate. Is Dawkins' mind able to even, like, halfway comprehend the truth of God?
Yes, if you believe in prevenient grace. If you believe that
but I also
the grace
believe
of God by
that
the Holy
some
Spirit
people's
is
hearts and minds have been hardened to the point that they cannot.
Yes.
And I think Dawkins has hardened his own heart and hardened his own mind to where I do not think they could have a debate, and I do not think Dawkins would hear half of what Craig says.
Well, that's the thing is...
It would be a debate for the benefit only of the audience.
Well, that's the vast majority of debates are that.
Yes.
The vast majority. And I do agree. However...
I know that it's the noetic effects of sin.
Uh-huh.
It's a very reformed type of theory.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is.
I'm not putting Dawkins beyond the ability to be reached by the grace of God.
I'm not.
I think
but
he is,
I do put him beyond being able to be reached by reason.
Yeah. No. Well, most
it would be miraculous intervention that reaches him, not reason.
Most non-Christians are not reached by reason.
And Wright keeps pointing out we need to reach people by reason, and I just don't think. I think without the mind of Christ, you can't understand the mind of Christ.
Yeah,
and that I think we shouldn't
be. The trend in apologetics is not toward reason right now.
No, I think we shouldn't be afraid to engage and discuss, but we shouldn't be surprised when it's met with misunderstanding, with skepticism, with doubt, and with mistrust.
Yeah.
Because the mind captive by sin, the things of God do not make sense.
Yeah.
It just doesn't. And so I don't think reason is necessarily the answer.
Yeah.
Which is then we're pushing into chapter 6, which is God, power, and human flourishing. And that often people have the wrong image of God.
That they do. And he gives two
and so
common ones.
Some people reject God on the basis of their incorrect perception.
Yeah.
Some people follow an incorrect understanding.
Yep.
But it reminds me of the last battle. Chronicles of Narnia.
Yeah.
When Puzzle the donkey is wearing the lion skin and is the fake Aslan.
Yeah.
And some I say people.
They're people.
People, animals, mythology. Yeah. Some Narnians respond by rejecting the notion of Aslan entirely. They're like, oh, if that's who Aslan is, we don't want to have anything. The dwarves are for the dwarves.
Yeah.
We reject it all. Some follow the false Aslan, thinking, I just misunderstood him. I've always misunderstood. I don't know. Who am I to ask? He's Aslan, you know? Yeah. Some people reject the false Aslan, knowing that the character doesn't align with who they know Aslan to be. And then some just aren't followers of Aslan at all and aren't going to start following that fake one.
Yeah.
But it does remind me of that, story of there's someone pretending to be Aslan and, people the Narnians don't really know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so we kind of see that a lot.
Some of them are deceived by that. Some of them...
Yeah, and so we see that in our current world. Some are deceived into thinking, into this false view of God. Some of them are repelled by a false view of God and are like, well, that's who God is. I don't want anything to do with that. Yeah. And some people are like, wait, that does not line up with the Bible. That does not line up with what's in Scripture. That is not right. These are two different things here.
But even within the church, you do also have pretty wide disagreement on the nature and character of God, how he relates to the world and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which complicates things.
It always does.
Yeah.
Because things are complicated.
Things are. Life is complicated.
It's not always a donkey wearing a lion skin.
No.
So on page 99, he says, what you think about God or the gods in the world and how they relate or don't relate to one another has a recognizable shape. So he's talking about why do we talk about, modernity as a worldview? Why do we talk about Gnosticism? Why are we talking about, why would you talk about Epicureanism? It's because old heresies resurface.
Yeah, they always do.
If you think you found something new, you didn't. You just found a heresy that's old.
Yeah.
And the things that were said about Gnosticism in the 1st and 2nd century are things that should be said about Gnosticism today.
Yeah.
We don't have to refight some of those old fights because they've already happened.
Yeah.
Saint Nick already smacked them.
Oh, yeah.
Not Gnosticism, but
Sure. You knew what I was thinking.
Yeah. So he also talks about there's no room for God in the system because the state has grown to fill in the gap. That is very true, specifically for, though I feel like...
Which that was characteristic of, Sovietism.
But I feel like that has become very prevalent in America. A lot of people assume American means Christian, and the American dream is the Christian vision, and those are very different things.
Yes.
Those are not the same. And it's easy to think that any cause that you might have equates to the gospel. And if your cause is not fulfilling the Great Commission, it does not equate to the gospel.
Yeah.
And so he talked about that on, I think I've mentioned it before. And when we talked about in You Are Not Your Own, about how everybody kind of has a platform and everybody kind of has, this is these are the things that we're filling these gaps with. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so we'll get back to that. So he says, let's not fool ourselves. Theology matters.
It does.
And so theology, to me, think that theology is just an academic exercise.
Mm-hmm.
That it's overthinking some
Mm-hmm.
deeply embedded truth. They think like, you know, like if you get cotton candy wet, it just disappears.
Yeah.
People think that's what happens when you start talking and thinking about theology. Like,
yeah,
it's like I'm pouring water on my faith and it's just going to disappear. And it's like, if the gospel, if your faith just disappears under any amount of scrutiny, then you don't have a good faith. You don't have a firm foundation.
Yeah.
The gospel will hold up to any scrutiny.
Well, your faith,
when Thomas, you know, make fun of doubting Thomas, he's like, look, until I see his hands and touch them. And Jesus doesn't like,
he's not offended by that.
He doesn't yell at him. He doesn't say, oh, you're going to hell because you disbelieved. He's like, here you go. You can touch it.
Yeah.
You know, touch it, poke it, prod it, you know?
Yeah. In fact, he offers him the exact things that Thomas had insisted he would need. And John never tells us that
Thomas didn't say to touch
took
it.
him up on
he
it.
Just said he needed to see it.
No, he did say, unless I put my fingers in his side. And Jesus offers him the exact things that Thomas has said would require, he would be required for him. But John, it's in John's gospel that it records that about Thomas. John never says that Thomas actually takes him up on that offer. He just cries out, "My Lord, my God."
Yeah.
But I think, is it Mark? It's Mark or Luke. I think it's Mark or Luke who actually tell us that Jesus made that same offer to the other 10 disciples while Thomas is gone. That he says, "Here, look, touch and see." See that I'm not a ghost like you would think that I am. Does a ghost really, have a body like this, a physical body? And so, which kind of, in my mind, lets Thomas off the hook that it was not just Thomas. It was all of them who were like, wait, what?
Yeah. But I always point out that Jesus did not rebuke Thomas's scrutiny.
No.
At all. He didn't think like, oh, he shouldn't be acting like this. Like, if your faith cannot hold up to scrutiny, your faith has no foundation. Theology is the study of God. Yeah. And that matters. Not just the study
of, but it's ideas
about God.
Any idea you have about God is theology. Period. And so you can have half-baked ideas about God. You can have just assumptive.
Well, we're in Pennsylvania. Not too long ago, Daisy prayed one night.
Oh,
sorry to throw her under the bus, but she's sick. She's all right. So she prayed one night that God would give her a ring pop.
Yes.
She prayed on Saturday night. So on Sundays, the canteen is closed. Like the snack shack is closed. You cannot buy ring pops on Sundays. And so Daisy Saturday night prays for a ring pop on Sunday. And of course, she does not get a ring pop on Sundays. We're not going to make that happen for her. Yeah. And she says, Mom, why didn't God answer my prayer? And I was like, because you prayed a selfish prayer. I'm like, God is not a genie. Yes. Like her idea of God, that matters. She sincerely thought that she was just going to pray it and it was going to make it happen. Yeah. Which, good for her on the faith of a child, but also she's going to have to learn.
That's not how prayer works.
That's not how prayer works. That's not who God is. God is not there just to like grant your little wishes for ring pops. Yeah. So, and she did get a ring pop on Monday. Yeah. But she was really mad all day Sunday that God didn't answer her prayer. And we had all day Sunday to say, Daisy, when you pray selfish prayers, like, you should not expect answers.
Sometimes.
And sometimes the answers are no.
Sometimes the answers are yes. Sometimes the answers are no. Sometimes the answers are wait till Monday night.
Yeah, wait till Monday. And the store is open and you can get a ring pop. Because, of course, Adam is a sucker when it comes to Daisy. And so he is, of course, going to buy her ring pops every night from then on out.
It was actually a great investment because they last a long time and they're cheaper than everything else.
All right. So, on page 101. Okay. He says, but theology is the things to live for and indeed things to die for. And that reminded me of I put in the margins, The Ball and the Cross by G.K. Chesterton. Yeah. If you've never read G.K. Chesterton books, maybe don't start with that one.
I was going to say that might be the one to start with.
He
loses you in all of his books. He loses you in all of his books.
They're kind of wild.
That's the one though that I think makes a lot of sense.
Running around the world chasing each other?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm telling you, man alive, I was like so confused as to what was happening. The Man Who Was Thursday, that's like an acid trip. It becomes one, and I've never been on an acid trip, but I think I might have when I read that book.
You think you've experienced it based on that book. All right, so the ball and the cross.
It is acid trip adjacent, if that's the word.
I'm going to read kind of a lengthy quote from that book.
Okay.
Because
from the ball and the cross?
From the ball and the cross.
I like it.
Because he says, why shouldn't we quarrel about a word? What is the good of words if they aren't important enough to quarrel over? Why do we choose one word more than another if there isn't any difference between them? If you call a woman a chimpanzee instead of an angel, wouldn't there be a quarrel about a word? If you're not going to argue about words, what are you going to argue about? Are you going to convey your meaning by wiggling your ears? The church and the heresies always used to fight about words because they're the only thing worth fighting about.
I like it. That's the whole point. That's the whole motivation behind C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man.
That is like the whole point of the ball and the cross.
Yes, but Lewis's Abolition of Man, he sets out in the beginning telling you that all of this was triggered by him reading in a textbook that something was described as beautiful or something like that, or wonderful or brilliant or something. And he's like, no, the thing itself is not brilliant. What you're describing is your feeling about it, and like that's what launched him off, like that words matter. Yeah.
Words matter, theology matters. How we use our theology, the words we use to describe the things we believe about God, like those things matter.
Yeah.
Like he's...
Yeah, and it's not enough to say, well, you know what I mean.
Well,
no, I don't know that I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's his Adam grades for the Wesley Biblical Seminary. He's a teacher's assistant. And so a lot of times he'll, count off points because the student didn't say what they thought they said because they didn't use the words correctly.
Yeah.
But the words matter, and how you communicate and how you express those ideas, that matters.
Pastors, theologians, pastoral theologians, all we have are words. Yeah. And so it's important what we say, not just what we intend about what we say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think most pastors and theologians, and I think pastors in training focus on how to say it and not what they're saying. That if they get the how right, if they say it with the right inflections and with the right passion.
They get the aesthetics right, and they miss the...
They miss the actual words.
Yeah, they miss the content. Yeah.
That was the total aside. So ancient Greeks and Romans, he talks about them being held accountable for what they did in office.
Oh, yeah.
And I was wondering, like, would our system be better or worse? Because on the one hand, accountability is always a plus, but on the other hand, you could just prosecute, every party is just going to prosecute the last one.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're seeing play out now is the current party prosecuting the last party. And it's like, I don't know. It'd be different if they were being prosecuted for like the things they did.
Yes.
Like if you're prosecuted for dropping bombs on droning an innocent family, that's a little different than, oh, you had documents somewhere you shouldn't have had documents. Like that's just kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, and also, this might be an Aiden question, but is anarchy necessarily chaotic?
No. It's a Michael Malice question too, but no, it's not necessarily. Because we normally do. We normally do.
Anarchy.
It is.
It would not be chaotic.
We normally do. And I don't know of any like legit anarchists who are like, burn things down, anarchists.
Have you never met your son?
I said legit.
Aiden's a legit anarchist.
So
it wouldn't just be like in the Fed, get rid of the Department of Education for Aiden. He'd be like, oh no, we have nothing.
It is
no police department, no fire department.
It is one of those. Nothing. It is one of those examples of linguistic theft, which you mentioned back on 86.
Which
that
is a
we equate anarchy with like lawlessness. Well, I mean, it does.
Technically, is lawlessness.
It's not. No, it's not. Well, it's not lawlessness. It's rulerlessness. But so yeah, we normally equate it with like everything's on fire, the Joker in the Batman universe and whatnot, and that's not.
But Batman is just as much anarchist as the Joker is. He has just as little regard for the law as the Joker.
I mean, he's a vigilante, no doubt. He is. But he at least has a law within himself. He's not going to kill the Joker. He's not going to kill the villains.
The Joker has a law within himself.
Well, yeah.
Does that matter?
No.
Okay.
No.
I'm not.
But a form like so one of it was John Stossel actually who used the illustration. If you go to like a skating rink,
mm-hmm.
that's anarchy. Like there's like I mean, folks are just skating, but they like negotiate it out voluntarily and whatnot. Nobody's like running over other people or taking off their skates and trying to like
you occasionally see it.
Someone getting hurt, but you occasionally see it in democracy.
But
you
not
occasionally see it.
I'm just saying it is not like an all out chaos as you would expect.
Yeah.
All right. So God remains sovereign over all human powers and human authorities, which means human authorities must always be held accountable. And then my question was, but how?
Yeah.
He gives some examples.
He does.
And his first example was unsuccessful. It didn't work.
Yeah, but...
So it was the asylum seeker, for those that maybe didn't read or need a refresher. So an asylum seeker being returned to his home country. The clergy stepped in, called out the bad behavior of the government. The government stops that time and then comes back later when nobody's paying attention and deports him anyway.
And he's killed, I believe.
And so... It says to his dangerous fate. It doesn't say what happens to him.
Sure, it doesn't say what happens.
Because he probably has no idea what happens to him because he didn't go try to find him after he was deported. He didn't fly to Cameroon to find the man.
Although, I'd like to Google search that and see whatever became of dude.
Anyway.
But yeah.
So
it's not
effective.
But that does raise a question. Even if it's ineffective, is it still the right thing to do?
But was there a more effective thing that could have been the right thing to do?
I don't know.
And his issue is, we're going to hold them accountable by noticing when they do bad things and basically yelling at them to stop, and then they'll stop and turn around and do it when you're not looking. They just know to be sneakier and quieter.
No, it's like trying to get the neighborhood kids to get off somebody's lawn, but as soon as you go in, they're back out on that neighbor's lawn or whatever. That,
number one, is that effective? Is that an effective way to hold your government accountable? Okay. He goes, what did he do after this? What did the clergy do after this when they found out, hey, you did this anyway? Did they do anything?
I don't know. That would be an interesting question.
When those people are running for re-election, they have signs with the dude's face on it. Hey, they killed this man because they wanted to seem harsh on crime. What do you do?
Yeah.
Then, what's next? Because that can't just be it, because that doesn't work, clearly. He gives one example, and it didn't work.
No, he didn't give one example.
Okay, so the second example was speaking out concerning legislation.
Sure.
Okay, so how do we do this? By what platform do we do this? How do you decrease infighting? Because if you go on Twitter and you say, hey, currently pro-life issues are... Oh, yeah, it's X now. Sorry, Elon. Didn't mean to do that. So if you go on X, the pro-lifers are kind of mad right now because Trump, the Republican position, his position is 16-week abortion ban, or after 16-week abortion is banned, and of course Harris is up until birth. And so do you go on X and you say, Trump's crazy, it shouldn't be 16 weeks. Either a life matters or a life doesn't matter. 16 weeks means it's okay to murder people for a few months.
Yeah.
But if you say that, then you're going to have people yelling at you because, you're attacking the better option of the two, or you know what I'm saying? There's all this infighting, and then you're wasting your time infighting. And how does that hold him accountable? How does it hold him personally accountable for bad policies?
Yeah.
It doesn't.
No.
And that's again.
I mean.
Again, they don't care.
Who?
Our politicians.
No.
They don't care. You can say whatever you want about them. None of them care.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you can publicly speak out about legislation and try to hold people accountable when people don't care about accountability.
Yeah.
So then third example, which I know made you irritated, was give up all of our power to the UN. And somehow that's going to magically make it better.
Yeah, let's trust those guys with power.
And how does giving the UN power help? How is that something the church is doing?
Yeah.
That's not something the church is doing. That's something the governments are waging war. The governments, the nations, they're out there doing their thing.
Yeah.
That's not something we are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that most authorities don't care what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't care what we do and say.
Mm-hmm.
Most people in our church don't care what we do and say.
Yeah.
Like most Christians reject the authority of their own church.
Yeah.
So we're like, most politicians would reject the authority of anybody that voted for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not an authority. So how do you hold somebody accountable who just doesn't care? Like, have you ever tried to make a child obey when they literally don't care?
Have I?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Exactly. Like, it's an impossible task.
Like,
so
you don't know what you're going to do.
Yeah. You're like holding still in hands. You're like, you are picking this up. And in reality, you picked it up and you just kind of forced her along for the ride. And she's like, I literally don't care what we're doing right now.
Yes.
Do not care a thing in the world.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I just don't know that he offers three
Three
ways,
examples,
and they're all terrible.
They're all
insufficient.
I mean, they're all just so wanting and yeah.
Anyway, so moving past that,
yeah.
He gives a quote that says, "You can always tell when idol's being worshipped because it demands sacrifices."
Yeah.
So we're talking about that on the he's
good.
talking about it on the national level.
Yeah.
But if you zoom in and look at a family level, right? Instead of what are you sacrificing in your family? Like individual families, like what are you sacrificing?
What do you mean? Tease that out a bit.
Like, so you prioritize what you really want, and
Yeah.
you do the things you really want to do. Your calendar, there are certain things written in pen, and there are certain things that get fit in if they can. So what are those fit in if they can things? Those are the things you're sacrificing.
Yeah.
Because you don't care about those things.
Yeah.
So if like the kid's sports schedule is
at least not so much so that something else
can't bump it.
Yeah.
If your kid's sports schedule is written in pen and their church involvement is written in pencil, you're sacrificing their relationship with God for their involvement in the sport.
Yeah. Well, and there'd be some who would say...
And that makes that an idol.
There would be some who would say, you're equating someone's relationship with God with their church attendance.
I 100% am equating someone's relationship with God with their church, not attendance, involvement.
Their church participation, sure.
Because, you may not be there 100% of the time, and you may still be plugged in, involved, growing, being discipled. And you may be there 100% of the time and refuse to be discipled.
And not, and not submitted to discipleship.
Attendance doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're showing up and you're not letting it change you, why show up?
Yeah.
I mean, it's something, but it's not enough.
Yeah. It's not the same as.
No.
No.
And you find your priorities. Where's your money?
Yeah.
Go. And what's on the calendar in pen. Like what's on your calendar and what's in your wallet.
Your calendar and your checkbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you have to prioritize the things that are really important or they don't get done. And so a lot of people give a lot of lip service to their priorities and then turn around and sacrifice them on the altar of lesser things.
Yeah.
Which means the lesser things are idols. I think that's what that means. All right, so on page 110 he says, somehow we have to recapture the art of speaking gladly and without embarrassment of God and doing so in public. And so when we were reading You're Not Your Own, we noted that everybody has a platform and they're yelling their identity into this crowded room. And so like, what if instead of standing on these platforms and yelling our own identity, we started using all of our platforms to simultaneously all proclaim the gospel. And like, not just like in a hope for another world kind of way, but like a hope for our current world kind of way.
Yeah.
Calling
people to transform lives now.
Yeah.
Not just punch your ticket for heaven.
Right. And doing the good that you can now.
Yeah.
Like, what is it? Yeah. Like, who's your neighbor? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? And who's your neighbor? Wesley said it's the person in front of you and the next person you meet. Yeah. And so what would it be if we loved the person in front of us and the next person we meet like ourselves in all of our day-to-day interactions? Anyway. And we probably need more Christians in politics. Yeah. Because I feel like Christians in politics, they would feel, I think you're talking about politicians just aren't accountable.
And not just like not just wearing it on their sleeves. We're not talking about
but actually going
Christians
to serve.
Yeah, we're not talking about we need more Christians who are willing to wear a cross and thump their Bibles. And
No.
But like
real
who are actually
with real Christian ideals,
who are governing
trying to really help their people,
and they are governing from a biblical worldview,
right.
worldview centered on.
These people are made in the image of God. Yeah. Every person is worthy. We're supposed to care for the widow, the orphan, the poor, the powerless. Like this is our job.
Yeah.
And so if we had Christians who would actually take up that role, there's a lot of Christian folks who are retiring now. Like a lot of the boomers are getting old and retiring. Maybe a bunch of them need to go into politics.
Maybe
a lot of them need to start looking at, hey, how can I serve my community? How can I, be the, commissioner in my county or superintendent of my school? So, because some of us younger folks, we got a lot on our plate. We're raising a lot of little people.
A lot of them.
On page 111, he said, the world urgently needs energetic people who allow their lives to be transformed and transforming. So we need people to be part of the story of God in public, to live and speak and act truly, wisely, and fruitfully for Him in tomorrow's world.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where we end. So, and I think, for this week.
Yeah. We got 2 weeks left.
We still got more.
Chapters 7 and 8 next week.
Yeah.
9 and 10 the following week.
Yep. And that's it, I think.
Yeah.
And then August will be over.
Yep. That'll be the end of August.
It's sad.
It is sad. August is flying by.
It is. Which is bad.
Yeah.
So, anyway. Join us next week. And comment.
Yeah.
Or if you think, if you had other ideas for, he gives his examples of how we can hold our leaders accountable.
Yeah.
There
were a lot of things.
I mean, I think there is something to be said about letter writing campaigns and basically just telling them hey, I see what you're doing and this ain't cool.
Yeah.
And
a lot of that comes down.
Nobody likes.
A lot of that does come down to are you willing to be critical of your own people when they are in power?
And your own people.
Or is it always but you don't want to sabotage their ability to be reelected?
Your own people.
It's people
you mean
that you're
party
supporting,
line?
Party line. When the Republicans are in office, you can't be critical of them because they got the midterms in 2 years, and then they got a re-election coming up in 4 years.
Spoiler: I'm not a Republican.
I know.
I'm also not a Democrat.
I know.
I'm one of those annoying independents.
But that's both parties. Any party does seem like everything's centered around circling the wagons.
Yeah.
And you never really even have an opportunity to speak truth to power unless it's the other party or somebody you didn't vote for because midterms are coming up and then you got re-election. So yeah.
I hear
you. And there were things I feel like we should note. There were things in these 2 chapters that we did have great concern with. We didn't really delve into those like we did last week. And that's fine. But if you want to talk about those things,
are full of notes.
Why in the world does he keep saying this? And
we're full of things.
Yeah.
We got lots of notes. So if you want to talk about it after church on Sunday, or church on Sunday, we're at the park.
The park.
And so if you want to talk about it at church on Sunday, since this is a fellowship Sunday.
Yeah. Lost Mountain.
We'll fellowship and talk about
11 o'clock. Get there early if you're able, but 11 o'clock we're gonna have a great time. Burgers, dogs, having fun with fellowship. All right, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.